And then we have the Syria chemical weapons attack. First heard about the chemical weapons attack. First, I was still reeling, and I still am reeling, as everyone should be, from the fact that Israel has this ongoing massacre of literally unarmed protesters and people marked press and children. So this is happening on a daily basis. There's zero outcry from the world. The U.S., of course, is blocking all these resolutions for investigations. Unbelievable, right? So, of course, the hypocrisy is just peak absurdity, where the world is suddenly obsessed with a social media video put out showing a chemical weapons attack. I feel like in the past, when this has happened, there's been more hesitancy. I don't know. I mean, I know that all this shit happened with Obama and the investigators went, and it was also very odd timing where on the eve of the, basically the chemical weapons investigators on the ground in Damascus, Assad just decides to use chemical weapons. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson has debunked this, as well as many other military officials who have said there's absolutely no reason that Assad would have done that. It doesn't make sense. And in fact, the rebels had more of an incentive to use them. The rebels have been found using chemical weapons in the past several times. So that aside, the timing of these is always very strange. So when I first heard, there's a chemical weapons attack in Syria, I was just like, wow, that's amazing. Because I just heard that the Syrian government was making advances on basically from East Ghouta to Idlib. It was already making this evacuation plan to transport the armed fighters out of there. It had taken over and taken back almost all of the territory from the rebel group that was on the ground that was controlling these areas. I mean, it did not need chemical weapons. This is the most obvious thing, right? And this is what military commanders will say, and this is what people are saying who have inside knowledge of the military, who are going out on outlets and saying these things and getting shut down, or, on alternative media, they're saying this. That's obvious. The Syrian government did not need chemical weapons. It was highly successful in the military operations, taking over and taking back the ground that was taken by the rebels. Just a week prior to this, Trump had already declared, to the surprise of many people in his cabinet, that he wanted to pull out militarily from Syria. Talks out of both sides of his mouth. Nothing he says should be taken with any sort of, it should be taken with the smallest grain of salt that exists in the planet. I don't know what happened. We don't know what happened. We have no idea. All I know is that there's several counter narratives that have poked several holes in the theory of the establishment press. Obviously, that, and I'll get into that in a second, but of course, all the capitalist media is just replaying over and over again these horrific videos of the children and civilians in this intense suffering. They're saying chemical weapons is the red line. And of course, this was ordered by Assad. Overwhelming evidence points to the fact that Assad has done this, point blank. Democracy Now! Has been, for the last 2 weeks, having on pro-interventionist after pro-interventionist. Mazam Beg, the former Guantanamo prisoner, has called for a no-fly zone, and I'll get into what that means in a second. I mean, very flippantly, right, with basically virtually no challenge from these hosts that are interviewing these people. So this is the premier progressive network that is supposed to be challenging war narratives, and they are really just running full speed ahead with the establishment narrative on this entire incident. So, whenever we see intense propaganda campaigns like this, we have to just really take a step back and understand that this is all a concerted effort, and it usually follows the same formula. So a couple quick things. Just like the liberation of Aleppo, it's not mentioned at all that the U.S. has been funding rebel groups on the ground with tens of millions of dollars for years and years, arming them. They have obviously ties to Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. All the unworthy victims to the Western press are the hundreds and hundreds of Syrians, if not thousands, that were held captive in Duma. They were literally held captive. So these are unworthy victims. These are people who are never mentioned. Of course, the rebels are never mentioned. Every time you hear the numbers, Assad has killed 500,000 people. It's never talked about that it's a civil war. It's never talked about that half of those casualties are actually Syrian soldiers. Syrian soldiers are paid like $50 a week to do their job. And then you look at someone from the White Helmets, or I don't know what these rebels are paid or how the money's filtered down, but this woman, Carla Ortiz, went and interviewed a bunch of former White Helmets, and they said that they were paid like $1,000. So a lot of these people get into this organization as volunteers. They want to help people, and the White Helmets do save people on the ground. Unfortunately, they are essentially an extension of the US government. It's unfortunate that everyone ran with this narrative and said there's overwhelming evidence that Assad gassed his own people, because we actually knew nothing. We need to sort through the facts first. So I was really concerned with just everyone jumping out of the gates and saying what happened, what didn't happen. But as the facts have filtered out over the last 2 weeks, it's been quite interesting, because there's quite a few people who have gone to the site and actually interviewed the doctors, the medical staff, witnesses, victims, who actually said there was no chemical attack whatsoever. So now it's getting to the point where, it's no longer, could it have been the rebels or was it Assad? Now there's another narrative coming out that says it might not have happened at all. And here's the thing. If there was an attack, if there wasn't an attack, if it was Assad or not, it still should not change anyone's opinion whatsoever about military intervention. So let's just get that out of the way. And, you see these people on the ground, basically CNN reporters walking around sniffing backpacks, like literally sniffing a child's backpack and saying, "Oh, something happened here. This stinks." Like in a bombed out city. Britain's special forces, the former head of Britain's special forces has come out and said, it's absurd. He said, no one believes this, that Assad gassed his own people. He said he already won the war. He said this opinion is shared by senior commanders in the U.S. military. Then you have Rand Paul also saying that. He said Assad did not carry out the attack, or he's the dumbest dictator on the planet. 10 guys with machine guns are more lethal than this attack was.
I mean, what he just said is a point that I've made, and we've talked about on Media Roots many times before, that it's not even like, it's not that I don't believe that he's capable of using chemical weapons. Like, I don't know. Maybe he is.
Yeah.
But why, if he wanted to just kill a bunch of civilians or kill a bunch of people in an area and punish them or whatever, why would he do that? Why would he use that and not just like line people up and shoot them or bomb them? I mean, that part doesn't make sense to me. Why chemical weapons the only thing that will generate international outrage and cause the international community to say, okay, now we need to do regime change? Like, why do that over and over again?
Well, it doesn't make any sense at all. And that's the main point that I think people who are clear thinking say. Again, I'm open to anything. I'm open to evidence that is counter to my preconceived notions. 100%. I always will be. I mean, that's the way that everyone should be. I'm completely open. Send me facts and I will look at them. Unfortunately, what I have seen since this alleged attack happened is zero facts on behalf of the intelligence officials and establishment officials that are saying what happened. And instead, I'm just seeing all these things eke out that actually flies in the face of those facts and provides an alternate narrative, which is that, the attack didn't happen, which is just insane to me. It's just mind-boggling to me that the uniformity of the U.S. press, I mean, the complete obedience that all these people have access to the same people that Russian journalists do. All these Russian journalists who go to the site and talk to the doctors and talk to the victims and the nurses and all the people who are there. And it's not just Russian reporters. That's just what Shane Bauer and Ken Roth want to claim, that everyone who's not running with this narrative is like a Russian stooge. Look no further than Robert Frisk.
So when Robert Fisk's article came out that contradicted the official narrative in The Independent, I knew immediately that it was going to be latched onto by people like, from all sides of the spectrum who like want to broadcast this like false flag in Syria thing. I knew that was going to happen, but then I also knew that people were probably going to try to smear this guy. Like, I could tell immediately that they were going to try to like not just debunk the content of the article, but like smear him and lie about him, and like claim that he just like made it up or was getting handled by Syrian government officials, and all that shit started to happen immediately. But then, of course, the Alliance for Securing Democracy was also on their Hamilton 68 dashboard claiming that that was the most boosted article by their Russian bot accounts that day, was the Robert Frisk article. So not only was it, a story that was manipulated by the Syrian government, it was also being boosted by Russian bots. So it's like, don't even look at the article. It's like, it doesn't even become about the content of the article. It's just, well, he must have been, lied to by the witnesses he talked to were like people that were plants by Assad's government. I mean, it's just all crazy the way that people are trying to go after him.
Well, it doesn't make any sense. It's just like what people will say if you talk to people on the ground in North Korea, people on the ground in Venezuela, people on the ground in Iran, and people on the ground in Syria. They're all paid actors. They're all held at gunpoint to say these things if it runs against what the mainstream says. I mean, it's always the same story. Really? Is that really the case, that these people are all literally plants and paid actors? Or is it more probable that the intelligence officials that are planting the original story are probably lying or manufacturing aspects of it? I mean, what's more believable to you? It's like, I mean, good God, Robert Frisk goes to Syria. He's on the ground. And I'm going to read a little excerpt from his article because I think it's really important. He was alone. He had no handlers. He wasn't followed around by soldiers. They weren't directing him of who to talk to or not. He says, quote, "War stories, however, have a habit of growing darker. For the same 58-year-old Syrian doctor then adds something profoundly uncomfortable." He's talking about the Syrian doctor once he found the hospital that the alleged attack took place at. He says, "The patients," he says, "were overcome not by gas, but by oxygen starvation in the rubbish-filled tunnels and basements in which they lived on a night of wind and heavy shelling that stirred up the dust storm." Dr. Asim Rahabini announces this extraordinary conclusion. It is worth observing that he, by his own admission, is not an eyewitness himself. He refers twice to the jihadi gunmen of the Army of Islam in Duma as terrorists, the regime's word for their enemies, and a term used by many people across Syria. Am I hearing this right? Which version of events are we supposed to believe? I walked across this town quite freely yesterday, without soldier, without policeman, or minder to haunt my footsteps, just two Syrian friends, a camera, and a notebook. And he was clamoring around these like giant ruins to just speak to people. And he was musing. He was like, maybe because people like live in far distances from each other, he's like, they maybe didn't hear about the chemical attack. He was like, the strangest part to him was that the doctor just said, you know, that this didn't happen. And so it's less weird that maybe people like in these desolate, more remote areas that he was kind of, you know, walking like miles around and talking to didn't know about it. But it is very strange that the people at the actual hospital said this didn't happen. And then you have Russian journalists going and they actually track down that child who was splashed with water, that video that you see over and over again, the kid's just being doused with water and screaming. And the kid in the video literally is fine. And he says, you know, what happened was that people outside the hospital were shouting, gas, gas. And they said, run in the hospital. And then they just started pouring water on all these people. And people from the white helmets filmed the incident. And then they left. I mean, is this kid an actor? He seems an extremely good actor, if he is. Is he being held at gunpoint?
It wouldn't matter because like he's being used in those videos that were like the mainstream media was trotting around showing them like coming to the hospital after the chemical weapons attack.
Yeah. Unfortunately, all these other pro-interventionist people will not accept any evidence or information that does not fit the pro-intervention narrative. They all say it's fake news, it's Russian propaganda. They're open to zero evidence that would be contrary to their beliefs. This one guy does another interview where he interviews all the people at the hospital. They say the same exact thing. And he's just called a stooge, you know, by these people. They're like, look at this fucking moron being used by Russia. It's like, well, what do you mean? I mean, where's the corporate news journalists? Where's the Western journalists other than Robert Fisk, who has won countless journalism awards, who works for a mainstream publication? Has literally anyone else tried to go interview the people at the hospital? I mean, where are they? They were there. He says that he was on a bus with all these fucking mainstream journalists. Where are their reports? Let's hear their accounts with the witnesses who were there. It is bizarre to me how all of these people can just be uniformly on board with a narrative that has not been proven to sell war. I've been a media analyst for the last 10 years, and it's still so difficult for me to understand that people don't have their own agency or will fight for their own agency or will put their jobs on the line and say, I'm not going to do this. That's what really pisses me off. And I saw this happen in Venezuela where, you know, you dare to report something contrary to what we're told and you're a stooge. I'm a stooge for the Venezuelan government. Everyone I talk to is paid. They have to say these things because they're given a clap bag of food. They're going to get killed if they don't go along with it. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just don't believe that. And, you know, when Democracy Now! Just has on these pro-imperial guests, one of them says limited bombing gives Assad a green light. And the other one says the no-fly zone is necessary. That's insane. I mean, a no-fly zone, according to the Pentagon, would need at least 70,000 U.S. personnel on the ground, It means not only just removing the Syrian ability to shoot down or to launch missiles. It means literally bombing the entire capabilities of the Syrian state. An aggressive bombing campaign to deliberately cripple any of their ability to wage defense. It would literally start a major war. People on all sides will die, and it's not a very casual thing. This is what happened in Libya. Just calling it like simply a no-fly zone is a misnomer. It means a very serious action and a very serious escalation of war. And these Hillary campaign officials like Neera Tanden and all these other people who on the eve of Trump bombing Syria had the fucking audacity to say, thanks Susan Sarandon, while quoting fucking the news that Trump's bombing when Hillary would have been bombing quicker is outlandish. This is where we're at, where these people are saying, thanks, Susan Sarandon, as if fucking Susan Sarandon is why Trump is bombing Syria. This is how warped the shit has become. And you can reply saying, wait, Hillary called for bombing every time she went on fucking record, dude. Why is this Susan Sarandon's fault? And then you have people who dare to question this shit. Like, you know, Jimmy Dore dares to question the chemical weapons narrative, is having people on that were there on the ground in Syria saying, hey, this is, you know, I saw something else. And CNN has this bizarre hit piece talking about YouTube advertisers pulling their ad revenue from quote unquote extremist channels, starts by talking about ISIS, moves on to talking about pedophiles, then goes to neo-Nazis. And at the very end of the article, haphazardly tacks on Jimmy Dore as a, quote, extremist, far-left conspiracy theorist who talks about how the Syria chemical weapons attack never happened. I mean, holy shit.
It's pretty crazy.
I mean, it's just outrageous, Robbie. And then, you know, you hear from these people who are on the ground, again, these quote-unquote paid actors, these Russian stooges who are at gunpoint. Again, paid actors. Everyone's a paid actor. Instead of maybe saying, hey, this is weird. Why are all these people saying something that's completely contrary to what the government's telling me? And then again, even just bombing a country without any evidence whatsoever, like literally Mattis is out there saying, we have social media reports telling us this happened. That's what we have? I mean, it's the point of such absurdity. It's almost more, it's like we're on an expedited path of war with such trigger-happy assholes at the helm that you don't even have to have a fake WMD campaign months and months of the propaganda. It's just, you have a social media report, you have a video out there, bomb within a day. And if you don't bomb within a day, use your garrison in the Middle East to do it for you, Israel, where, you know, we had Israel bomb for us. And then, I mean, if you want to get into the white helmets, check out Max Blumenthal's report for Gray Zone. He's been slandered for it. I mean, he's been harassed for daring to talk about how the white helmets are not just this altruistic, life-saving aid organization. I mean, they are a group funded overtly by the U.S. State Department. You just had a Pentagon official the other day being asked, are the white helmets still getting paid? And she said, yes, absolutely. She said the bills are still getting paid. It's no mystery whatsoever. It's not a secret that they actually work on behalf and very openly are calling for Assad's removal and open regime change. I mean, you look at their website. If you just go to their website, it basically just links to things calling for a no-fly zone. It's operated by a PR company called the Syria Campaign. You're immediately directed toward all these intervention requests. And, you know, here they are winning, you know, awards and being lauded on Netflix documentaries as this civil defense organization. How dare you accuse them of being linked to the U.S. and being an arm of U.S. regime change? Well, what the fuck are they then?
Yeah, I mean, it's... They've really done a good job.
They're founded in collaboration with the USAID.
They've really done a good job of like making all this seem very legitimate. It's very sophisticated propaganda, extremely sophisticated. One of the other things that I find interesting about all of this is it really wasn't that big of a bombing campaign. Like, and it's already, you know, it ended very quickly. So I find that very surprising. It seemed like they were really gearing up for something bigger this time.
Right.
Especially because there was international involvement. It seemed like it was going to be Libya style. It wasn't, though. It was I don't know how many actual planes actually went out and bombed, but it seemed like it was mostly just like Tomahawk missile fired from ships.
And they didn't even they destroyed a pharmaceutical company that was producing snake venom and testing chemicals in children's toys. The SANA, the Syrian state news agency, reported that several of the missiles hit a research center in Barzeh, destroying a building that included scientific labs and a training center. And the guys who worked there, they were just like, I don't know why we were hit. They're like, we're a civilian pharmaceutical and chemical research agency. We did not expect that we'd be hit. He said, we produce antidotes to scorpion and snake venom while running tests on chemical products made in food, medicine, and children's toys. He said, if it were a chemical weapons facility, we would not be able to stand here. He said, I've been here since 5:30 a.m. in full health. I'm not coughing.
Weird.
I mean, it's funny because it's just insane.
Yeah, so it's like this idea that I feel like, and I even got really scared for a second. Like I got sucked into this concept that if we bomb, these sites or whatever, because I didn't know what sites they were going to be, that it's going to like push us into like a really, faster track to World War III. And so I was actually a little bit surprised how minimal it was. And the media couldn't just say this time. If you notice, they said this last time when he didn't bomb them enough. Like the media couldn't say, like actually blame Trump this time for not bombing Syria enough, because it was like the international coalition also did this sort of like minimal short-term bombing campaign. And the only reason I bring that up is because I feel like it needs to be stressed that the U.S. has been waging war in Syria for a very long time, waging a proxy war through like rebel forces, and also bombing ISIS, like using American munitions and stuff. That is a form of war. Like, so just because we would be like bombing Assad's forces now, it is an escalation in a different way, different type of battle in this region. But it's also like we've been at war in Syria for a very long time. And I feel like this sort of battle creep has made people sort of forget that, and that we have been at war there. So I just wanted to stress that as well.
Oh, yeah. No, of course.
And how many civilians have been dying from not just the rebels, but also our bombing there to bomb ISIS.
Yeah. And here's Trump saying gas killing animal Assad, animal Assad, animal Assad. And all these people are like, if you dare to ask, well, why would Assad gas his own people on the eve of this victory? They're like, you know what? He's just incomprehensibly evil, Abby. You just can't rationalize it. You just can't rationalize evil like that. That's their fucking response, man.
It's the same. It's like these monsters are just so monstrous and brazen that's why they're doing it. Don't you understand? It's the same reason why we're supposed to believe that Putin is so brazen that he ordered some kind of Russian exclusive, unique to Russia chemical weapons attack on this like spy in broad daylight in the UK. It's like, well, yeah, that's like Putin's style. He wants people to know he did it. And it's like, he's that insane. It's like
he just gets a hard on for dead spies and dead journalists.
It's weird how we're just supposed to accept that by default too. Like, right. I'm sorry, I cannot believe that on its face. I also cannot believe on its face that what the MI5 said, and I brought this up in the Tom Secker podcast, about the polonium accusation, even though even Craig Murray thinks that Russia did that, like the fact that they traced the polonium, the MI5 says they traced it back to Putin's presidential headquarters in Moscow, just seems very cartoonish to me. And I'm surprised more people didn't like ask more questions about that and say like, where's the proof for this? Like, were you in Moscow with radiation detectors secretly? Like MI5 implantation into Moscow, like doing scientific research in the country? Like, it just seems highly unlikely to me. And I'm really surprised more people don't question these things. That the president would be that insane, that Putin is that crazy.
Yeah, and Assad is that evil. Really quick points is that Syria, backed by 22 Arab nations back in 2003, tried to introduce a UN Security Council resolution to rid the Middle East of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, it was rejected by Israel. Another point is that the U.S. has not only been bombing the shit out of Iraq and Syria for years, but it's also been using white phosphorus, which is a chemical incendiary that burns straight to the bone. And if you tell me that they're not using it for that, you're wrong. They don't use it just for a smoke screen. They use it completely indiscriminately. Another point is that back in 2013, Syria gave up its chemical weapons stockpile the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, I'm reading from the BBC right now, implemented an agreement reached by the U.S. and Russia to destroy Syria's chemical weapons arsenal. They made sure that that happened. They had stringent verification that it took place. Damascus was given 1 week to submit the comprehensive listing of its agents, types of munitions, and location, form of storage, production, and research and development facilities. And after they submitted its inventory, the team entered and destroyed the arsenal. So, and the international watchdog confirmed that the declared equipment for producing, mixing, and filling chemical weapons was destroyed. So I don't understand what the hell is going on here. I don't understand just the complete willingness of the media. And I know that the public disagrees. I know that polls show that I would hope, at least in Britain, that the majority of people do not want to bomb Syria or get involved in a war or escalate what's going on. But they just salivate at the mouth. And the egging on from the mainstream media of Trump to bomb more, how Trump isn't doing enough, it's disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting. And so going back to this desperation of looking for something who's countering this, and I think that's where the Tucker Carlson thing came in. But my God, I mean, what a time to be living.
Yeah, when Tucker Carlson is like the only one on the mainstream media,
like questioning any of this. Yeah. And
that's
then you
a really
have
sad
people,
state of affairs because he's so bad on so many things, and he's not even good on his anti-war stance if you look at the bigger picture of it. So
well, he just said we need to focus on China. I mean, and then you have people like Mehdi Hassan, who I normally love, on The Intercept on the eve of like this potential large escalation of this conflict, saying, "Dear Bashar al-Assad apologists, your hero is a war criminal, even if he did not gas Syrians." I mean, I don't even want to go through this article, but I think the main takeaway is that here we are on the eve of this potential, escalation, getting into a hot war with Russia and escalating the horrible shit that's going on in Syria. And this is what people are coming out and doing. And it really just reminds us of on the eve of the Iraq War, all the pieces that were calling people Saddam apologists, Ashley Banfield, and all these people, Fareed Zakaria, all these people on the mainstream media who were lambasting everyone from Dennis Kucinich to Ron Paul for daring to question the war and saying, "Wow, you sound like Saddam's PR spokesperson."
yeah, even Dan Savage was talking like that. It's very disheartening to see that they're using the escalation rhetoric as an opportunity to come out and like excoriate people on the left for not just coming out and saying Assad is a monster or mass murder, essentially. I mean, that's just very strange because I don't remember Mehdi, even though he sort of selectively would use some good narrative angles in his old program, I remember, like about Ukrainian neo-Nazis. I remember he was one of the only people on Al Jazeera who brought that up and legitimized that subject. Even though he did that, it's like I don't ever hear him calling like U.S. Military people or leaders monsters or mass murderers. It just seems strange to me that these people are okay using that kind of language about Assad, but they would never use it about our leaders or like Netanyahu, And I find that very telling. It's like it really does show that there's something wrong. Because like I guess to me, I see someone like Netanyahu is way worse than Assad.
It's just such a bizarre thing to do now. I'm on record calling Assad a war criminal and a monster. Where are you?
That's a very good point. It does seem like the people who do this and the people who blow around like this during these situations and don't hold down the fort and don't like stick to their principles, it's like they want to look good in retrospect for some reason. It's it's just an odd position to take.
It's a credibility protector. It's like saying, I did this. I wasn't a stooge. No one that I know has said, I love Assad. He's never committed any crimes. He's never bombed anyone. I don't know anyone who's said that. And Robert Fisk has also even gone like above and beyond to like list his war crimes and say all the shit that Assad has done. But he's still called a Russian stooge. I mean, it's just absurd.
Of course it's absurd. It just shows how black and white and like psyoped this whole debate has become over the years. And I believe a very deliberate psyop was done to try to fracture the left on this issue. That's why you see Democracy Now! being like full regime change. That's why you see places like the Intercept being like split down the middle on regime change. And frankly, there aren't even really any people writing for the Intercept who are strongly coming out against these narratives about if this chemical weapons attack is real or not. So that's telling in of itself that you have them using their space to have narratives like this coming out, excoriating leftists for being too soft on Assad, but nothing really coming out too strongly against these narratives that we're talking about. Just like they really never did anything that strong against sort of the Russia hysteria, Cold War 2.0 stuff until, it became a really hot topic that was like becoming like so hysterical. I mean, they really stayed away from that. And I felt like they could have maybe helped turn the tide in that, but they didn't. The Nation and other outlets were doing a far better job when, they would at least publish Stephen Cohen and people like that in them. The Intercept didn't have any voices like that. They frankly still don't on like the issue of Russia. Glenn Greenwald's probably the strongest voice they have, but essentially it's pretty, I don't know. I mean, and what did Glenn Greenwald went on Democracy Now! Recently and said there's ample evidence. It's overwhelming that Assad did this chemical weapons attack.
Obviously, the use of chemical weapons in any instance is horrific. It's a war crime. It's heinous, and it ought to be strongly condemned by everybody. I think that the evidence is quite overwhelming that the perpetrators of this chemical weapons attack, as well as previous ones, is the Assad government.
I mean, that was bizarre. Was that a credibility saver for him too? I mean, why would he go out there and say that? I find that very troubling. We expect someone like him to at least stick his neck out and be like, I don't know if he did this or not. Maybe we could take like the middle ground. But like to say that, it's like, really? It's just really disappointing.
And let's talk really quickly about how you can't even entertain that notion. Like, it's one thing to say, oh, Assad, let's wait for the investigation. Why would Assad do this? Let's figure this out. Let's wait till these weapons inspectors are on the ground. It's another thing to entertain the fact that it didn't happen, might not have happened at all. Then you're a lunatic, then you're a conspiracy theorist, then you have zero credibility, and you should have all of your revenue and advertising pulled from you. I mean, let's just talk about how scary that's become, where we can't even entertain known tactics that the U.S. government and CIA and even if it wasn't the CIA or U.S. government, it could have just been just groups on the ground that have complete agency away from us that did this. So why can't we talk about this?
And we don't even know what this is also. It's just like the Salisbury incident. So I feel like it's like we have to know what it is first. We have to at least have some kind of consensus on what it actually is that happened.
But that's the thing. You can't differ from the consensus that it happened and that it was Assad.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's what's so disappointing about it. It really is just about stifling debate. And unfortunately, we have all these sort of more lockstep narratives that are pushing against it. And it seems to just sort of lockstep into this, Zero Hedge, InfoWars, Cernovich, all these people who are pushing against this, did Assad do this attack narrative? And it just seemed very lockstep. It's like even that stuff is not, it's not using like a keen sense of like investigative journalism. It's just sort of more repeating these counter narratives, and it confuses me in the sense that like I eventually like I really feel like I don't know what's happening here, and I get a little overwhelmed with seeing like I don't buy some of these counter narratives necessarily either, like that this rebel group did it or this other one. It's like I don't know, like I really don't know what happened here. I don't even know what actually happened either. So it is really interesting to see like that, that so many people, but I mean, the good thing is, I guess, that so many people are questioning this right out of the gates, and are, even like the fact that someone like Rand Paul would say that is really surprising. I feel like that's it's almost like less risk in saying something like that now than there was before. I mean, maybe not. Like at the same time, there's a lot more heat coming down, but like it seems like there's more people just thinking that out of the gates. I don't know. Maybe it's hard to tell.
I mean, that's where we're at with this narrative, where you cannot even question these things without, being castigated and ostracized as a conspiracy theorist or a lunatic. And it's just unfortunate because I I think that in private, a lot of these people would agree, but unfortunately, because it's just been taken off by the alt-right, these lunatics who just repeat everything that will absolve Trump, people are hesitant. They don't want to be lumped in. They don't want to be called these things. They don't want to be written about in the mainstream media as not credible. And it just creates a really unfortunate chilling effect where you have to go along to get along. And it's just weird because I really don't see many people other than Russian media and, Robert Fisk and the just generic alt-right weirdos basically questioning this. It's really, really unfortunate. So here we are. We don't know what the hell happened. We already bombed Syria. We don't know if it's going to escalate further. But again, what did happen? What happened in both of these instances? What exactly happened?
We have really no idea. I mean, and it's also interesting to me that, so Rand Paul just came out, this just in the news about 2 hours before we started recording, claiming that he talked personally to Mike Pompeo and Trump. He met with them in the White House. And basically, Trump and Mike Pompeo both agreed with him that the Iraq war was a mistake and that regime change is bad and that it destabilized the Middle East, and they promised not to do it again. And now Rand Paul is going to not filibuster and actually support the assignment of Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. That's a huge deal in my mind because Rand Paul has been historically a little bit putting up a little bit of resistance to some of these Trump appointees and mentioning things like he made a big deal about Gina Haspel being appointed as CIA director because of her history with torture and stuff. But it's strange that all it took was a conversation with Trump to convince Rand Paul and make him believe that Trump is seriously anti-regime change when during Trump's actual speech announcing the bombing, he didn't even make a point to try to ease the public mind about it being a long-term campaign, regime change or not, or anything like that. All he talked about was how Assad was like a barbaric dictator. This is in his actual speech announcing it while the bombing had just started. And I remember right after his speech ended being truly horrified and thinking, wow, this could really mean full regime change. The way he's describing there doesn't seem to be a time limit to it. And then about 45 minutes later, James Mattis came on and basically said the bombing has already stopped. This is a limited strike against the chemical weapons sites. This is not about taking out the Assad regime. And Trump said nothing like that. He didn't even try to make a point to ease people's minds about this being another full-blown war. I just thought that was really telling. And to me, it shows that he just really doesn't care about, this idea of not launching wars or not. He just doesn't. You would think that if he was sensitive to that issue on a personal level, he would want to ease the public mind, but he didn't even care. Even Theresa May made a point in her speech to say this is not regime change. Just shows how unsavvy he is and how actually he doesn't actually care about these issues. He's not a pro-peace candidate or any of these weird things that I hear people say.
Yeah, he just says whatever he knows will help him win. That's the art of the deal, baby. You have Ron Paul sucker him in a little bit, say, no, we won't do this. And he's like, okay, cool. Now I'm just going to nominate Pompeo. Great. What a fucking tool he is. Good God.
And everybody's, after this happened, a lot of people took this stance where they thought that Trump had been pushed finally into bombing Syria. That this is what happens. It's like the heat, the Mueller investigation is heated up so much that this is you got your wish. Look, thanks to you guys, thanks to the neoliberal resistance, now you got your wish. Now he's bombing Syria. It's that's to me a little bit, giving Trump a pass here. They didn't force him to pick John Bolton. It's just strange to me that somehow they always can take their focus away from the president himself for deciding to do these things. And Mark Ames said something on Twitter, which I strongly agree with. He said, it's wrong and foolish to pretend that Trump was somehow forced to bomb Syria and hire Bolton. This is who he is. He's the humanitarian interventionist president, just as Obama was the bankster's president in spite of his campaign can't. Let the warmongers own their president. I just think that it's very wrong to think that Trump has somehow been manipulated into doing this right now. I mean, it's just very wrong.
Yeah, can you imagine if we were like defending Obama a year and a half into his presidency, being like, Wall Street's forcing him to do this. He doesn't want to do this for Wall Street. He doesn't want to do all these things. He's being forced to by the bankers. Like, can you imagine how ludicrous that would sound?
It does sound ludicrous, and that's essentially what a lot of like Air America-y type people were saying about Obama when he first got in.
Sad.
Yeah. I mean, I remember even a lot of generic Democrats went so far as thinking that his family must have been being held hostage, and that's why Obama was going back on so many of his promises.
I just love that all of a sudden we're supposed to believe Trump at his word during the campaign, like a total con artist, reality star charlatan who impersonates other people because he's like a mafioso crazy person. Oh, but everything he said on the campaign about those tokenistic bullshit gestures that nodded to anti-interventionists was dead on. That's what he really believes. Not the torturing families, not the bombing, carpet bombing neighborhoods and putting people into Guantanamo and all the rest. No, not that. It's just like the most selective takeaways, you know? It's like he never even ran on he never ran on an anti-interventionist policy. He talked about building up our military stronger than at any other time in history. That's anti-militarism. That's anti-interventionism. Weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's total Rorschach politics. People just seeing exactly what they want to see. Certain people really like the fact that a politician is speaking to their feelings on, why are we meddling over there? Like, let's get out of there. Like, and take care of our own country. Like, they like that he's speaking on that. And it's like really exciting to them, and they just like choose to latch on to that and not the other things he's saying. It's a serious problem, and I was very disappointed at the progressive sort of response to the bombing, where there's an opportunity missing to really go after Trump and put this on his doorstep. Just like I would have seen some of these same people going after Obama. If they were truly principled, they would have also been going after Trump for this.
We need to build an anti-war movement, and the first step of that is you have to blame those in power for carrying out the wars and the bombing. I don't understand why we can't just focus our anger and whatever, like our actions.
Yeah. Well, it has to be some
bizarre.
larger triangulation that the deep state or whoever pulled off a false flag in Syria after Trump announced that he was going to pull the troops out to trick him into like not, doing that. That's basically ultimately what it's like. And it just seems so disappointing that that's what we're left with. It's like, really? Like, you really think that like he had to be fooled into it? I mean, come on.
Well, again, we can't let these people hijack the narrative. There is an anti-war movement. They were, Answer was organizing all these protests all over the country. Hundreds, if not thousands of people went out to protest the bombing. And the biggest thing that we can hope for is de-escalation and hope that the U.S. removes all involvement of what's going on. And don't be afraid to question these narratives. I mean, definitely look for yourself. Look at everything that I'm saying. Sort through the material, but don't let people, squash your dissent and marginalize you and make you feel like a lunatic for questioning this, because this is what the media does. You can look from Palestine to Venezuela to Syria. It's all the same. It really is all the same. And it's all the same actors that are pushing these narratives every time. And there's always another side to the story. There always is. It's really insane. So thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Thank you so much for all the donors. Definitely check out Robbie's previous podcasts that we talked about. And thanks for sitting through this one. Let us know what you think in the SoundCloud timeline.
Thanks for listening, everybody.